Oh, well, welcome everyone. I usually start the evening with a little story or set the tone. I'm giving that job to a dear person, Liz Matt, who has a personal experience to share with us. Liz?
Hello, everybody. I don't know if you know the city of Bonita Springs. It's a lovely place. Essentially, you would say it's upper middle class and certainly beyond that in a lot of places. But on Saturday with two other people, I walked within two shanty towns, true shanty towns in our town, where undocumented immigrants live in a don't ask, don't tell world. We were giving out these packets. Last night I was with 10 of my neighbors and we walked around a middle class, working class neighborhood that's almost entirely Hispanic, giving out these packets. The packets say, preparing your family for encounters with immigration. And the thing that takes your breath away is that among the things in this packet are temporary power of attorney documents for the American-born children of our neighbors who may have to be left behind. We used to love immigrants in this country. In 1986, I was a broadcaster for the Liberty Centennial. I was on a tall ship. We adored our immigrants that weekend. What has happened since 1986 and deciding that they're all a problem is something that I can't account for how it's happened. I just know that I am very eager for the speakers tonight to tell us how to protect my neighbors and if I need to protect my neighbors. And I thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Well, we just had some post-hurricane painting done at our home, and there were two crews of painters, and one day there was one crew, and we asked about it, and the other crew left the state, probably left the country. And it's so sad that we have to have this program, but we are honored to be able to have four impressive speakers and presenters tonight to share with us. For those of you who have just signed on, we are in what's called focus mode. So you're able to see anyone that is speaking other than one of our speakers. Eric is going to be on by phone, but I've made him a co-host, so his microphone should be able to be on as well. Otherwise, you can see yourself, you can see the names of the people, but you won't see all the faces. During the program, if you have questions, put in the chat, just put in Bill Petrarca. If you just start writing the word Bill, and there'll be a P after it, Bill Petrarca, and send him the question. He's going to filter the questions and he'll ask the speakers, our panel, the questions that you have. At the very end, if there's some time left before we sign off, we'll open up for general questions, and all the cameras will go on, or your faces will go on other than just yourself. But for now, you're only going to see the speakers. But the Q&A goes to Bill, and he will filter those questions for you. We hope to conclude by around 8:25. We have some closing remarks, and then for those people who may want to stay on for a little while, we usually do hang around for a bit for you to share. So this program for tonight, Deportation, Facts versus Fiction, was not an easy one to put together, because when we started talking about this at the beginning of the year, we suddenly got into 3 special sessions, and then the beginning of the regular session. And those 3 special sessions all focused on the internal battles within the Republican leadership, but all focused on who could be the most MAGA-like and do the most damage on behalf of the immigrants in the state of Florida. We have 4 speakers. I'm not going to go through all of their bios in detail. The information that you receive for the program has more information, but I do want to share a few things. Tessa Pettit, the executive director for the Florida Immigrant Coalition, was born and raised in Haiti. She worked with families experiencing homelessness. A U.S. resident since 2001, Tessa aspires to foster collaboration among all immigrants and to expand immigrant power for a Florida where everyone can live, labor, and love without fear. This is something that we all thought we were moving towards every single day, until suddenly it looks like there's efforts to pull it all apart. Dr. Renata Bozzetto is the deputy director of the Florida Immigrant Coalition. She's a Brazilian immigrant, a public university instructor with a doctorate in sociology from Florida International before she joined forces with the Florida Immigrant Coalition. We also have by phone Eric Bracken. He's a principal with EJB Strategies, a lifetime organizer and strategic campaigner and organizational collaborator, nearly 20 years with SEIU leadership. But most importantly, in recent years, he's been working to bring together a strategic alliance of Florida Rising, Florida Immigrant Coalition, Faith in Florida, Central Florida Jobs with Justice, Dream Defenders, and the SEIU, all focused on collaborating to authenticate and for authentic democracy. And also with us, Dwight Bullard. Some of us knew Dwight as a state of Florida senator or Florida state senator. He's a political advisor for Florida Rising. And his mom was a senator before him. He's a family of dedicated public servants. And in fact, all of these are public servants. And whether they were official teachers or not, they're all teachers in a certain way, and they're all teachers for us tonight. With that, Tessa, as the director for the Florida Immigrant Coalition, I'm going to turn this over to you and your team that you assembled. And we are honored to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Karen, and everyone who's made it possible for us to be here. And welcome, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. So we've gone through the introduction. Hopefully, as we go on with the conversation, we will get to know the speakers a little better. So a couple of weeks ago, Jim reached out and he asked if we could talk about immigration, if we could talk about deportation, but also if we could talk about the intersection between immigration and democracy. And I got excited because my thought for quite a while has been that immigration is one of the pawns being used to attack the democracy in this country. And while we're going to talk a little bit today about what the bigger picture is, what immigration is in the midst of everything that we're seeing, but also what we can do to protect immigrants while we also protect democracy in this country. So I will start with Renata. Because of Renata's knowledge, as you heard, Renata has a doctorate in sociology. She also leads all of the programming part of the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and she values information and data and knowledge and education quite a lot. So Renata, to you, my question is, there's been intentional attacks on immigrants, intentional misinformation for the communities at large, which have led to even immigrant communities underestimating the threat of mass deportation. What can you tell us about misinformation and the narrative being used, how it influences people's reaction towards immigrant, and what are data and information that you can share on the reality of our immigrant communities in Florida?
Thank you, Tessa, and it's a pleasure to be sharing space with all of you. And thank you, Liz, for the story that you shared and for the work that you are doing, because the protection of our communities will really take all of us. So we appreciate the story that you started tonight with. So Tessa, the invitation for us to think about this moment, it's a moment in which immigrants are being criminalized and targeted, not only because the system intends to marginalize individuals, but in order for many other issues to happen and to be excused at the federal level, for the dismantling of many of our structures and what hold us together at our values to happen, that bad guy needs to be pointed out. And unfortunately, that narrative has been used against the immigrant communities. So when I say that, and Tessa mentioned the misinformation and the issue that we even have immigrants themselves questioning the concept or even the harm that mass deportation could cause, right? That confusion that has been created. We identified that this is sourced in some ways that we talk about our neighbors. Most of us agree that we want to live safely, that we want to have our kids in school safe, to have the freedom to walk down the streets without fear. We all agree that. And then when a candidate comes to power saying that he will gonna go after criminals, people tend to agree with that. They tend to believe that going after criminals is a good thing because they want safety. The problem for us is when this definition for what counts as criminal is really targeting our neighbors. It's really targeting people who have been in the state of Florida for 20 years, 30 years at times, and who, for fault at times not of their own, have been caught in the traps of a broken immigration system that gave them no opportunity to adjust their status. In so many other cases, we have thousands of immigrants who have been fingerprinted, who passed background checks, who submitted their application as they were asked to submit their application to the United States appropriate agency that oversees immigration. And yet they are now becoming vulnerable because of practices of this administration. So I'm specifically talking about 600,000 Venezuelans and 500,000 Haitians that have been inspected and granted a temporary status in the United States to live and work regularly in the United States. But for this administration, they are now, very soon, they will become deportable. They will be losing their status and in very cruel ways, specifically in the case of Haitians that were given a regular status until the end of 26 and the end of 2026. And then just over a week ago, the Trump administration said, wait a minute, we are expediting this date. So we told you that you could live and work here until 2026, and now you can only do so until August 2025. So the issue with the confusion is because people are not filling the blanks. They are not understanding that what this administration is posing is really a democratic threat. What we are seeing is a threat that is far beyond immigration because it's going through the very fabric of our society, defining who gets the right to stay here and who doesn't, and amplifying the categories that would disqualify somebody as a legitimate person to be with us. And that is a major concern. So when we are speaking about data, so I can wrap up and move to the other speakers as well. So when we are talking about data, we have millions and millions, right? I would say by 10 years ago, we already have over 10 million people in the United States that were with an irregular status. And the reality is the practices have not focused on addressing the problem. The practices have been focused on criminalizing, and punishing. Similarly, the practices that we have now, they are inadequate to the moment. So we can talk more about those practices, but I think what we're, the risk that we're facing is really beyond the immigrant community per se.
Thank you so much, Renata. And I would like to ask you to chime in a little bit about what we've seen in our work, how there are beyond those temporary statuses that they're trying to take away. Are there concerted efforts to take away even permanent immigration status from folks? And if you could share some information about that, what is happening that we're not talking about?
Yes, so we have concerted efforts, and unfortunately, not only at the federal level, but we are also in a very hostile state. So we just witnessed the situation with the Columbia University graduate student who had a permanent residency status. And that status is being revoked by nothing other than him exercising his right to protest something that he felt to be very unjust. So this is one of the machinations. Others are in the state level, the extension of what counts as a crime. The state of Florida is implementing criminal charges for people who leave the state and re-enter the state, as if the state border was a national border. And what that creates is for individuals who have been here for so many years, the opportunity to have a criminal charge. And once they do, their legal resident status can be at risk.
Thank you, Renata. So you've made it very clear that immigration is now being weaponized and it's really being used as a political tool. So I would like to invite Dwight and Eric to chime in a little bit. Why do you think that immigration was deemed the most impactful weapon that the new administration could use to do the work that they're trying to do to dismantle democracy?
I'll jump in, and of course, my comrade Eric can chime in as well. Really, because principally it's all encompassing. And what I mean by that is when we think about the institutional structures of the American democracy, a lot of people make the assertion that the Constitution and the first 10 amendments, aka the Bill of Rights, were there to include everyone. When in reality, that is not the case. America was structurally designed for land-owning white men in particular. And the protective guardrails that were established via the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were there to further reinforce that. It's not until you get to the 14th Amendment that you now define what citizenship is for everyone else. That is the formerly enslaved, that is women, that is how we start to develop what we call a pathway to citizenship. And then you have the subsequent policies that Congress passes that both harmed and helped various ethnic groups, subgenres, if you want to call them that, of people in this country. And so whenever you have somebody in the vein of the current president who then comes along and says, well, we're going to use immigration as a dog whistle, it is a reminder to those that were designed to be protected from the very beginning, that there's a whole cast of other people that can now be dehumanized as a result of it. And the real dangers that it represents for a lot of folks are magnified and exacerbated on a regular basis. Prime example, and then I'd love for Eric to chime in, is you take something like 287G, which basically weaponizes law enforcement agencies at the local level to operate as ICE agents. The NAACP, just in Miami-Dade County, released a report during the Obama administration that recognized a racial injustice in law enforcement just in Miami-Dade, meaning that from the police department to the state's attorney's office, the whole sort of criminal system was racist. That's basically what the report identifies, right? So now when you combine that with this notion of immigration enforcement, you're now dealing with agents of law enforcement who haven't resolved the fact that they have a glaring racial bias now being tasked with determining who are citizens and who are not, and how that ends up manifesting itself in the modern democracy, or the so-called modern democracy, is that if I see a car full of brown people, it's now my responsibility as a police officer to ask the question, is what I've deemed in my head, because I have no guardrails saying that I shouldn't. There's nothing that says I'm going to be stopped because I just harassed US citizens who can prove their status. Matter of fact, what they're now saying is that via 287G, it is my responsibility to make this determination, to make this the so-called call on who is and who are not citizens. And it's easy now, considering the historic blinders of this country, to make the assertion then that a car of particular people have a high likelihood of not being citizens versus a car of a particular subset of people. And that is overtly racist. That is overtly problematic. And that is where we find ourselves in the current condition. But I'd love for my brother Eric to chime in.
Well, Dwight is the professional historian. He was a scholar and a teacher of history. I'm an amateur, but Tess asked me to touch on, how the South has been used, or how the South is what's tested here and created here in Florida. Ultimately serves to undermine democracy in the country. And I would say that the South has always historically undermined democracy in the country. Going back all the way to the so-called Three-Fifths Compromise in the early Constitution, which gave Southern states more political power, on the backs of people who were fully disenfranchised. Immediately after the Civil War, you see in press accounts from Florida within months after the Civil War ended about the need to figure out a way to essentially reconstitute a captive class of labor. And one way that was manifested was in the first constitution that Florida passed immediately after the Civil War to re-enter the Union, that they included a lifetime ban on people voting if you had a felony conviction that corresponded with increasing criminalization, particularly focused on Black people. Of course, you had things like poll taxes and Jim Crow laws and other things, but it took us 150 years to undo that constitutional clause when we passed what's now known as Amendment 4 in 2018. And of course, the DeSantis administration has done everything to impede the implementation of the people's will to restore voting rights to 1.5 million people in the state. You go forward another 60 years almost, and Florida, democracy is not just about what happens at the ballot box. It happens in all aspects of our lives. If we believe in economic democracy, unions are a way for workers to have more rights and more say in the place where they spend most of their lives, at work. And Florida was the first state in the country in 1944 to pass right to work laws, which then, of course, expanded across the South and now have expanded across the country. And so, there's just a long history of what kind of gets cooked up here, is ultimately expands and ultimately undermines democracy for many other people. The alignment vehicle, we call it Florida for All, which is the vehicle through which the groups you mentioned earlier come together, put out a report. I just dropped it in the chat last year, as a lot of people started to talk about Project 2025, pointing out how many of these things had already been tested and already passed in Florida in 2024 and 2023 and earlier. and does a good job, that report, of really keying in on some of the interests, special interests behind a lot of these laws. What I would argue is that, you know, what is happening now at a national level, in addition to the immigration raids, in addition to the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in addition to the stigmatization of the LGBTQ community, and many other things, is, you know, we're also, I think, watching in real time the dismantling of our economy. And you know, we just in the last few days have heard Elon Musk and others around him start to really plant the seeds for the dismantling of Social Security. In order to do these things, elites whose interests are to, you know, obviously to, you know, reduce or eliminate their taxes and ultimately make a more unequal society, have always needed people to stigmatize, to focus public's attention on as who are our real enemies, away from people like Elon Musk and towards people who functionally have very little power in this country. And so we watched this in the last few years, the escalation of culture wars in the state, you know, certainly was you know, helping to lay the groundwork for what's happening in DC now, and, you know, and what's happening in many other states around the country. One thing I'll say is that if we look forward, I think a lot of people nationally look at states like Florida, look at states in the South as, you know, ultimately, you know, conditions that the country will tolerate, in what is functionally you know, a whole, you know, a society that, you know, in the South, this, you know, our economic and political structures, you could argue are you know, bordering on apartheid, in the ways that they limit people to, you know, ultimately have any semblance of power or hope for their economic futures. And you know, for a long time, I think people have looked at the South as, you know, that's unfortunate, but, you know, that's yeah, there's not much we can do about it. And certainly in the political nature, right, kind of write off a bunch of these states as, you know, they're already too far gone, they're too conservative to be part of a path for Democrats, at least, to national power. And what is about to happen, based on migration trends just in the last few years, it's been a long time thing with people moving from the Northeast, from the Midwest, from the West Coast, more and more into the Southeast, is that by the 2032 presidential election, 2 presidential elections from now, there will not be a path to power, to at least an electoral college victory for a Democrat, without winning at least 2 states in the Sun Belt. And you know, so a lot focus on the blue wall right now. You got a whole Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and if Democrats do that, they can hold on to power, and going into the next decade, they're going to need to do that and figure out a way to win states in the South. And so, you know, structures are being set up that are designed to make it incredibly difficult. The only ways that, you know, we are able to functionally make good things happen for people in the state of Florida right now, as opposed to just stopping bad things from happening, is by ballot initiative. There's legislation going through the legislature right now to functionally eliminate citizen initiated ballot initiatives. And I could go on and on and on about, laws passed over the last number of years that have just made it structurally harder to think about making progress in the state. But that's happening everywhere. And of course, is a model for the country. So I'll pause. Kick it back to you, Tessa.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you. A lot to think about. I want to remind folks, I know we started a conversation about democracy, but again, we want to make sure that folks understand that, and the title of tonight's panel was Deportation, Facts or Fiction. And so talking about deportation, mass deportation, and talking about immigration in this current moment does not, it's not a conversation that can be siloed, because it is, again, part of a bigger picture, right? But I want to go back to you, Dwight, as being a former senator. What we're experiencing right now, and we saw it back in 2023, where we even had, after the passing of certain bills in the state, we even had certain legislators be candid enough on the press to say, well, that's what the governor wanted. And we know that democracy is protected by the separation of the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And so I would like for you to talk to us a little bit about what is the change that you're seeing, what is happening in our democratic process here. What are the elements, the vulnerable communities, the tools that are being used right now, and what are you seeing, and what can we do to stop that?
It's a bit of a loaded question, but I'll try to tackle it only because I guess the simplest answer is what we're seeing is a consolidation of power by right-wing, ultra-conservative factions. And I want to make sure I'm making the distinction for the folks on the call, right? Is that I think too oftentimes people conflate political party with ideology. And for a second, I just want to decouple that, right? Because what ends up happening is people start getting kind of lost in the sauce, because they're like, well, wasn't it the Democratic Party in the 19 whenever that was operating in this way? And didn't Abraham Lincoln and his abolitionist GOP bring about slavery? Let's decouple that. There's been a consistent tone and tenor of totalitarianism that has really impacted, and as Eric has pointed out, not only the state of Florida, but it's kind of like metastasized all over the country, of folks who are really using very dated tactics, if I'm going to be honest with you, right? We're talking about fascist playbooks that we've seen play out Germany in the 1930s, that we've seen play out in the American South throughout most, and some would even argue all of the 20th century, in terms of this need for both power, hungry for power, hungry for control, and the ability to do it by othering entire groups of people. And I just want to kind of remind folks, kind of going back to what I was talking about before, the building block of many of the gains that groups have made has really been that 14th Amendment. Why do I say that? I'm talking about LGBTQ rights become a thing because of the 14th Amendment. Via the 14th Amendment is where you get Loving v. Virginia, which argues that Black and white people can get married which then becomes the basis for same-sex marriage in the country. Because of the 14th Amendment, you also get really kind of the construct for all of the immigrant rights, workers' rights movements that you see starting to happen. The ability to unionize, worker protections, all sort of start to stem from that. But I would argue, and just putting a date on it, 14th Amendment comes as the end of the Civil War has happened. Reconstruction, America having to deal with this idea of co-governance with people that were once considered property. And what a lot of people have been trying to deny since 1867 is that there's been a persistent problem in America with people who had complete power having to now share that power with other people. And we've tried to fight it, we tried to deny it, we tried to turn a blind eye to it. But what we're seeing manifesting itself in 2025 is the grandchildren, great-grandchildren of those people saying that we're upset with the browning of America. We're upset with the push for more power. We're upset with the idea of equality. We're upset with the idea of sharing the financial benefit with people who we quote unquote deem undeserving. And now it's making its way into government. So just to land the plane, I could have made the argument that during my tenure in the state legislature, I could find, kind of quote unquote classic conservatives, Goldwater or Reagan conservatives, if you want to call them that were trying to make the argument purely around this idea of economics, but with an overarching desire for justice and quote unquote equality for American citizens, or even those aspiring to become American citizens. What I would argue now is that the ideology that has been adopted by one party in particular, and is spilled over into the other party, let's be clear, is one that is focused on this reclamation of who has the power, who deserves the power, and we don't want to share the power. And so what you're seeing through the legislature, through these actions, is they're saying that, to be this way is too woke. To have to now use pronouns is too much for me to have to think about. For me to talk about doing things in multiple languages is too much for me to have to think about. And so they're using the same dog whistles of English only, or these people have rights, or these people should be included or not be included. That has been tantamount to what we've seen from 50, 60, 100 years ago today. And it's not enough now for people to just say, I'm gonna, kind of wait this out. We don't have that luxury anymore, because that consolidation of power is going to do permanent damage and unravel considerable things. If this particular Supreme Court takes it upon itself to start ruling on old precedent or trying to recalibrate what certain amendments to the Constitution mean, or the understanding of those amendments, you could unravel a ball of yarn that could take another 100 years to fix. And I need folks to fully appreciate that. And it's not to be overwhelming for the folks listening. It is to create a sense of urgency around A, the need to fight back now, and B, to understand that whether the fight is immigration, whether the fight is human rights, whether the fight is LGBTQ rights, whether the fight is around the eradication of racism and sexism, all those fights are interconnected, interlinked. And you can't just pick one. You have to be able to stand 10 toes down and fight them all at the same time.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you. So powerful. So I want to go back a little bit, and we've heard what Dwight have said, and you've heard Eric also. And so I want to give people a little bit of kind of pin an image or a little bit of information about what is really happening in the world of immigration right now. And as we talk about having to stand up and fight for every single issue, just the pieces about immigration that are happening, where the lie is, where the misinformation is, and how it is being used as one piece of one social justice issue that we need to protect. I want to share with folks some information about what's coming down the pipeline on immigration. And Liz, thank you for sharing your story at the very beginning, talking about what you're doing. And yes, that we're going to talk a little bit later about doing more of that and protecting our communities. But I also want to share with folks other things that are happening in the world of immigration. And this is to reinforce Dwight's comment about the browning, everything being done to stop the browning of America. So the idea is to make America a place that is unwelcoming to immigrants, but it is also to remove immigrants from America. So we're going to start with those who have orders of deportation. Most of them having an order of deportation, not because they are criminals, but it's just because we have a broken immigration system. A lot of folks have been in the immigration system for 15, 20, 25 years, have never committed a crime. However, because of the broken immigration system, it's been very difficult, one error here or there, to give them access to a pathway to citizenship. But there are also a lot of concerted efforts we started talking about taking away permanent immigration status from folks. For example, they're going to reinforce the Office of Denaturalization, meaning that folks who are naturalized citizens who've been in this country, have gone to a legal permanent resident status, that those folks will have the capacity of losing their status if they find any error or mistake that was done in their file. I'm going to tell you a bit of a story just so that you can visualize this. I came into the United States in 2001. I applied for political asylum because I left Haiti because I was advocating against the government at the time in Haiti, so I had to leave. When I came here, I got the wrong immigration lawyer. I explained my story, and my immigration lawyer, when submitting my document to immigration, wrote a different story. And so while I was denied the asylum, and with my husband at the time, when we got informed that we were going to be, there was a huge possibility that we would be deported. At the time, my husband was 34. He had a stroke. Out of fear of going back to Haiti, knowing that we were going back to our death, I ended up in front of an immigration judge. I appealed the process, and I was given the opportunity to seek another lawyer. And I went for another lawyer who was able to make my case, prove that, replace the story that was made up by the former lawyer, told my true story, and I was granted asylum. In a case like mine, for example, the Office of Denaturalization could go in and decide that they want to they don't agree with the decision that the judge made, and that because there was a change in my story, that my case was not valid, and I would be denaturalized, right? There are a lot of people who use the wrong lawyer, who use a notarial, and have issues in their cases. We're going to start seeing people losing that status, a status that they've had. I have been a US citizen for 13 years now, right? But there is a possibility that I could lose it. There are a lot of folks that you know that are also legal permanent residents. What we have seen as a tendency, when legal permanent residents are entering the United States coming from certain countries, particularly Black countries, they are being under the pressure of an immigration officer at the port of entry. They are being asked to sign a form, which is the I-407, and not being given an explanation of what it is. But as a legal permanent resident, right now with everything happening in the United States, an immigration officer asks you to sign a paper, you will sign it. Well, what that form basically says is that they're giving up their legal permanent status. They're voluntarily giving it up when re-entering the United States. So there is also a lot of work being put at taking away people's permanent status, not just temporary statuses, but permanent statuses. And so with everything, and then there's work also being done to remove, there's currently bills being passed that they're trying to pass in Tennessee that would trigger a Supreme Court challenge of Plyler versus Doe, which is the federal Supreme Court decision that made access to undocumented children eligible for access to public school. They're now working to take that away. So we will have children, school-age children, unable to attend school. Now, this is more damaging to this country than anything else, coming from a country where access to education is a luxury, and how long-term lack of education impacts the future of a country. This is certainly damaging to the future of the United States, but this is just one of the so many things that they are doing, in addition to how they are showing, publicly showing how people are being picked up, how the idea and how they're talking of mass deportation, and how there is an increase of support for mass deportation. And so my next question goes to Renata. Understanding what is happening, looking at how the American people are reacting to the decisions that are being made, to the abuse that is happening right now in this country, and also in the state of Florida, right? Understanding that there's a lot that the bills that are passing. For example, in the last special session, they confirmed the death penalty for undocumented immigrants. We understand, Dwight talked about the 287Gs. There's a lot of criminalization of immigrants. So what I would like to ask Renata, if you could, in this current moment, with everything that is happening, the level of abuse, how can you talk a little bit about how you think you can explain the silent acceptance by the community at large, seeing what is happening to folks who are their neighbors, their friends, right? Their co-workers, their colleagues. How do you explain America's lack of response and fight back to what is happening now?
Thank you, Tessa. I think that this is part of the facts versus fiction conversation. And that's why the conversation about democracy and the role of the South and the precarious situation of the state of Florida is so important, is that most people believe that the immigration system is under a checks and balances condition, which is not. When an immigrant goes to court, they are not going to court as a branch of our judicial system. They are going to an administrative court that is overseen by an entire apparatus under the Attorney General of the United States and the administrative branch. So let this sink for a minute, and that is where the conversation about a broken democracy illuminates why the immigration system is so much in trouble and why our neighbors are in trouble. And the community at large may think that this is individuals are going to their due process, where in the immigration system, due process is very, very problematic because it doesn't exist in the way that we aspire constitutionally, in the way that we aspire to exist. So let me give very concrete examples. First, the act of crossing the border without an authorization is a civil infraction. It's not a crime. Immigrants don't have the right of a public defender. That is very important. When we talk about an immigrant defending themselves from removal, whether they are an asylum seeker like Tessa illustrated with her story, whether they are a child, a minor, they have to present themselves in court, and if they cannot afford a legal counsel, they will present themselves alone. That's why only 14% of immigrants defending their case have legal counsel once they are facing a removal procedure, 14%. Then we have the situation of when does an immigrant get the right to speak to a judge? Before the Trump administration, we already had a very serious condition that's called expedited removal, which is once a person enters the United States, if that person has an encounter with immigration agents and border security patrol agents, that person can be removed discretionarily out of the United States without speaking to a judge if that person was found in our soil within 14 days. What the administration just did was they augmented that period for 2 years, which means if a person has been in the United States for 23 months and 20 days, they have been living here in Florida for all this time, they have a case that they fear persecution going back to Venezuela or Nicaragua or Haiti, just to name a couple of the communities that we have stronger presence in our state, they might not have the chance to present to a judge their case. They might not have the chance to present that they have a clear, credible fear of persecution going back home. So when we talk about a judicial apparatus that is under an administrative branch that has all the problems, all this baggage that Senator Buller commented on, which is a historical baggage of poor practices. And we have a system that Eric also very eloquently posted of states like Florida undermining our democracy and undermining participation, undermining civic engagement. When we have this apparatus overseeing the removal of people, that's where individuals think that there is a just system, that there is a line, that there is a way for immigrants to be seen with fair and equity. And in the reality, there is not. There is not. The system has many, many traps and opportunities for things to go wrong. And that is incredibly troublesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Renata. So I want to ask, and I'm going to invite all of you, Dwight, Eric, Renata, to invite folks. What is your call to action? What do you think that people can do in this moment to protect immigrants, protect democracy, protect social justice as a whole? What do you have to offer to folks on Present Now And keep in mind, we will also go into more direct support call to actions for immigrants now, like what we call community protection efforts that we're doing. But I want to invite you folks to share with folks, give them ideas of what they could do. And
I can
Eric, I know
start
you're in
with
the
that
middle.
one.
I was going to
Or
invite
you
Eric
want Eric to
because
do
I know he has to,
Oh,
he's in the middle of something, and then that would give him the green light to leave unless there are questions for him.
Yeah, I'm back. uh, yeah, I mean, what to do in this moment? Well, things are obviously happening very quickly, and um, I don't want to be the one to say what to do about immigration because that's Tessa and Renata. They've got the playbook about what we can do in this moment. I mean, I would just say that I think in many of our contexts we feel very it feels very powerless right now, right? And yet, I think we're beginning to see the signs of what uh, what our comeback looks like. Bernie Sanders is traveling the country right now in going to congressional districts that were only won by won on the margins by Republicans this year. He just went to Wisconsin, which is where I grew up, and he went to northern Wisconsin, a rural community. 3,000 people showed up. Many thousands of people showing up in other states and that and congressional districts that he's traveling to in Nebraska and Iowa. I actually just saw it yesterday that after he did this event the other day in northern Wisconsin, it had an immediate, the member of Congress immediately apparently got on the phone with Elon Musk, and what he was speaking about was the way that some of the cuts from Doge are impacting agriculture, are impacting small businesses, schools, and I think that they're already starting to feel nervous about the reelection. I think that certainly if Trump crashes the economy, they should feel very nervous about what the next election looks like. I don't particularly have the strategy here, but Tesla's stock prices have gone down 20% in the last few days, and we saw Donald Trump become a used car salesman on the White House lawn yesterday, try to salvage Elon's businesses. I saw a interview with Elon Musk, the other day where he was asked, like, what is the impact of what you're doing on your businesses? And he was clearly pretty chastened. I mean, he's lost, in stock options, probably close to $200 billion in the last few weeks. And that's because, people are showing up and doing things like rallying outside Tesla dealerships and, drawing attention to, we don't like what's going on, and, we're going to hold the people that are pulling the strings in charge. So, I don't know that the strategy is the perfect strategy is clearly defined yet on all this stuff. But what we do know is that the only thing that stops organized oligarchy is organized people. and people getting in the streets and people showing up to congressional town halls, and even in deeply conservative areas, I think it does have some kind of impact. And of course, the future is very unknown in this moment in time. But we've been through terrible things before in this country, and it is the diligence of oppressed and marginalized people, organizing, continuing to stand up, that has in some way, been whenever we've been able to bend the arc of the universe towards justice, that's what's done it. And so I don't have the perfect prescription for what people on this call should do, but it's something like that.
Thank you, Eric. Renata?
So in the immigration realm, I have two concrete asks. You give me the opportunity, I'm going to give two asks. One is, in Florida, we have 67 counties that are required by state law to collaborate with federal immigration enforcement. They are required. That means 67 sheriffs have to collaborate with state law. Anyone with federal immigration law, anyone else who is enforcing immigration in our communities is doing so with our state taxpayer dollars and is diverting their attention from public safety into immigration policing. And it's creating terror amongst our neighbors who are afraid to report crime, to send their kids to school, to go to church. So my invitation is that you express publicly, firmly, and vehemently that you are against that exacerbated policing of our communities and surveillance. Because what happened is, although only 67 sheriffs are required to have those agreements, we have more than 100 agreements in the state of Florida. That means state park, polices, fish and wildlife, municipalities are all signing the commitment to ask for immigration status and to create that inquiry at the local level. That is incredibly troublesome. Pinellas County, last week, the school district, that information was leaked that they were evaluating whether or not the school police should be part of that sort of agreement. That makes us all unsafe. We need to fight that type of surveillance and that type of persecution at all levels, so your voice matters. At the municipal level, with your county officials, go to hearings, you have town halls, go to them, email, call. Your solidarity against that surveillance and policing is very much necessary. And the second one is very simple. The materials that Liz is so gracefully distributing in her community is telling people that we have our right to remain silent. That's a constitutional right that we all have, regardless of where we are from, of our age, our race, our class. Thank you, Liz. It's a red card that reminds everyone that we have the right to remain silent. Now imagine if any of us is in our place of worship, in our house of worship, and in a sanctuary, and the immigration police comes and say, show me your papers. And the immigrants who are vulnerable say, I have the right to remain silent. And everybody else is, here is my driver's license. Here is my passport. I am an American. I can prove that I am an American. So the invitation is for solidarity of exercise your right to remain silent, not only because it protects all of us from self-incrimination, but because you might be protecting a father or a mother who have American children and would be separated from their children for life if we are not in that state of solidarity. And thank you for this opportunity to give this call to action.
Thank you, Renata. Dwight?
Yeah, similarly, thanks for convening the call. I recently was listening to someone who really kind of talked about the distinction between being an ally and being an accomplice. And she really kind of framed it in the sense that oftentimes allies, although empathetic, are oftentimes only concerned about how what is happening makes them feel. Whereas an accomplice is willing to sit in the discomfort that others are feeling in this moment. So my simple advice is we need more accomplices. Allyship is great, but if you're not using your position, your station of privilege, your voice, your feet, what have you, your abilities, whatever they may be, to advocate and sit in a place of discomfort with those that are being most harmed and most impacted, then you're not doing enough. And so I would just encourage folks to do that. Renata, put it very frank, it's your taxpayer money. If you live in the city of, insert your city here, and your police department is operating under a 287G agreement, that is your tax money. That is your local mayor, your local city manager using your resources to authorize danger and harm to other people. That means you have a right to vote that person out who's not doing that. That means you have a right to run for that office to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else. So, yeah, want to advocate. We need more accomplices. Like I said, allyship is cool, but I think everyone's got enough allies. We definitely need more accomplices, and I'd take it a step further, more co-conspirators in making sure we get our democracy.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, my colleagues here have said it all. I do want to add, if people want to know how to get involved, you can go to our website, which is www.flake.org. There are events. We provide trainings. We train people on know your rights. Understand that knowing your rights is not just for people who are undocumented or for immigrants. It is good to have the knowledge so you can share it. It is good to share the information on where they can access the training, on where they can access the information on getting one of those Know Your Rights cards. We also we partner with other organizations in the state. We also provide what we call legal observer trainings, where we train community members on if they witness an enforcement, what to pay attention to. What people don't realize a lot of time is that there's a lot of abuse in these enforcement efforts, and sometimes one mistake by an ICE officer can actually prevent someone's deportation. And there's no better way than to educate yourself. We're in the middle of legislative session. We invite folks to join our efforts during the legislative session by signing up for We Are Florida. Not only do we provide updates on what's happening up there, but we also provide opportunities for folks to take action in district, to call their representatives, to call their senators, to stop things from happening. We need more eyes, more ears on the ground. Stay alert, get involved. If you hear something, let us know. If there is an attack on immigrants that is happening in your community, let us know. A quick example before we go into the questions. The city of Jacksonville tried to pass a law, is trying to pass a law that states that anyone who is undocumented, any immigrant who is undocumented and enters the city is considered a felon. So basically, they're limiting access to the city of Jacksonville to immigrants and basically telling an undocumented immigrant, you have to leave. First of all, immigration law is prohibited at the city level by federal law. But we did not find out about it until after it passed all the committee hearings. We did not find out about it until it was getting to a vote in the city commission. And if it shows up in one city, it may show up in other cities. So be alert. If you find something, you hear something, contact Flake. We have a 1-800 number. Jim has our contact information. Send us an email, send us a note, let us know this is what's happening so that we can deploy folks to stop the damage that they're intentionally doing in the attacks on immigrant communities. And I will stop there. Thank you very much for listening to us. I understand there are a few questions, so we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, Bill's gonna ask them, and we got a ton of questions and not a whole lot of time, but go for it, Bill.
Yeah, I want to say that this has been an amazing discussion that you've 3 or 4 have brought to our attention. You have answered some of the questions already, so I'm going to skip those. But there's a couple high-level questions I'd like to kind of lump together here. One is, how many Haitians and Venezuelans do you think are in Florida with the TPS status, approximately? And I'm going to address these to you, Tessa, and then you can forward them to whoever you think could answer the question.
Yes, that's actually an answer for me. There is slightly about 220,000 Haitians on TPS reside in the state of Florida. There's a total of 520,000 throughout the country. And for Venezuelans, there's a little over 280,000 Venezuelans who reside in the state of Florida out of the close to 600,000 who have TPS. And that is not counting those who came in, who were invited to come in this country under the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan parole, who are here and who's now have seen their status being canceled. And that's another 100,000 for each country.
Wow. So that kind of leads to this next question, and that is, have the deportations in Florida actually started to happen?
Yes, so enforcement has always happened. Just so people know, enforcement has always happened. But yes, there has been more intentional enforcement in the state. For example, there's a lot of check-ins that have been reported by the Florida Highway Patrol in the Panhandle area. The north side of the state, they're seeing more implementation, more checks on the road. We're also seeing it in Miami-Dade. We're starting to see it in Miami-Dade County. And there has also been, there's always been the issue of racial profiling in the rural areas of Florida. But we still had some counties that didn't have 287Gs. We still had some hesitation to implement or for regular law enforcement to try to arrest folks, but now they have the green light. I think out of the deportation that we're seeing, the increase that we're seeing, I think the most dangerous part that is happening is the community members who are overzealous and who feel like they have the right to take action themselves. They want to take it upon themselves. what we've seen in actually the first incident happened in a hospital actually in Cold Springs, where someone was asked for they came into the hospital, they were talking to the receptionist in Spanish, and a nurse or the hospital manager, whoever came in and kept pestering them to have their immigration status, otherwise they would not receive medical care. There has been a couple of cases reported where hospital staff have reported folks who they think don't have an immigration status. So the most dangerous thing is the racial profiling that is happening now.
Bill, if I
So-
may add something to this, because I think it's important for people to understand on the fact and fiction as well, is that in some states, we hear a lot about raids. And raids, which is the immigration coming to big companies, meatpacking companies, they are not as common in Florida, because in Florida, we have this entire policing apparatus that is surveilling and arresting people at the individual level. So part of the misinformation that we have in our communities is that our Floridian neighbors believe that deportation may not be happening because we're not hearing about raids. But yet, just 2 weeks ago in Lake Worth, Florida, we had a dozen community members arrested from the street that police parked. We have videos caught by Ring cameras. In less than 2 minutes, you had these individuals being arrested. We have also issues of individuals going to their check-ins. When you have a pending process with immigration services, you have to do periodic check-ins. So we have documented cases of individuals coming for their appointment, bringing their documents as required, and there the officer telling them, oh no, don't waste your time, your process is denied, you are in the next deportation flight. So this is the type of action that is happening on the state, and why people might have the misunderstanding or questioning, are they happening? Yes, they are happening.
And just to give a little bit of context also and some numbers, the detention facility, the immigration detention facility in Chrome in Homestead has been the detention facility for Florida. It has a capacity of 600 beds. It currently has an occupancy of a little over 1,600 people being detained there, including women and children, when Chrome has not supposed to house women. And we understand that now there is a federal prison in downtown Miami that is now being used to detain immigrants.
So I have this question about the 2-year parole program. I think maybe Renata talked about that. And the question is, are you saying that nationals of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela here legally under the 2-year parole program are being affected?
Yes, there has been a memo passed by the Department of Homeland Security that actually officially left it up to the discretion of the immigration officer if they encounter someone who entered the United States under the CHNV parole, that person was not only subject to deportation, meaning that their parole status was immediately revoked, but that person was subject to expedited removal, meaning removal without due process.
And another question, how does a person or a family find a legal or trained advocate to support them?
We do have a hotline, which is the 1-888-600-5762. It's on our website. Basically, people can call the FLIC hotline, and we will connect them with pro bono lawyers, organizations that offer legal services, etc. Whether it is if somebody's been detained, whether it's somebody's in deportation, whether it is if somebody wants to have their case reviewed. What we also do throughout the state is we do what we call Protect the People Clinic during which not only we teach people their rights, and we also teach people how to do their family plan, right? Like similar to what Liz showed you. But we also provide legal review where we give them an opportunity to speak to an immigration lawyer for about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. And we do those both in person and virtually.
That's very good to hear. Thank you. And what's the status of the governor's plan to centralize deportation by paneling judges to review cases in Tallahassee? And have judges been identified and selected? And what's their background?
I'm not, the one thing that I know that the governor has established with the last legislative session, the special session, was centralizing. There's a name for it, and it's four folks. One is a sheriff, the second one is the governor, the third one is Renata, you're gonna have to help me there. It's a group of 4 people who are actually centralizing all decisions concerning immigration, but I think only one of them is a judge.
And I don't know, Bill, if that question also came related to the impanelment of the grand jury on immigration. That grand jury on immigration that was done 2 years ago, right, Tessa? 2 or 3 years ago. That was all in Polk County. All people on the grand jury impaneled by DeSantis was in Polk County. Now, what we know about this new articulation at the state level that I think is very important to share is that immigration is not the purview of the state. It is the purview of the federal government. So that is the number one reason why the state should not have an immigration task force. The second reason is that all the laws that are being passed at the state level and that we are creating this apparatus to implement them with this new policy that was just signed, all of those are in deep contradiction with the laws that we have at the federal level. The terms are used in very confusing ways. There is a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. So I think that the key message on having this task force is that it really hurts us all. It's going to cost us over $300 million. It's diverting resources from key programs that we need for a job that's supposed to be by the federal government and supposed to be strictly regulated through the Immigration and Naturalization Act. It should not be Florida law.
Yeah, I wanted to get one other question in before we have to leave. So if we wanted to contribute some resources, some money to the most effective organization in the state to help the people who are going to suffer from this, what organization should we be contributing to, or organizations should we be contributing to?
There are many ways. There are many organizations. So one thing is contributing to an organization like FLIC. We're a coalition of organizations, and we sub-grant to grassroots organizations throughout the state. We have 80 members. So contributing to FLIC, the money goes to our membership, the smaller organizations. There are also a lot of legal groups need help, such as Americans for Immigrant Justice, Catholic Charities Legal Services, and so on and so forth, pro bono legal groups, the Haitian Lawyers Association, the Jamaican American Bar Association. And the reason is that a lot of those legal groups get federal money, or their funding is very restricted. And so they are all facing a lack of funding for deportation defense. And so they all need, legal groups also need help to hire lawyers for deportation defense, because the demand from them has literally tripled.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jim, do you want me to go on with more questions or do you want to
So
close it?
let me close out, and then if any of the panelists or anyone wants to stay on for a bit, I just first of all want to thank everybody. This has been, as Bill said, this has been a phenomenal program. You guys did a great job, and we're just thrilled and honored. Eric, I don't know if he's, I see he still at least shows up there. We know that we were already Project 2025 before we ever heard of it. In Florida, and that's how Floridians for Democracy got started. We were seeing things happening, and we thought, you know what, we're the canary in the democracy coal mine, and the rest of the nation is right behind us. And now the rest of the nation's going to see what we've been feeling here for years. And Dwight's comment about if we don't push back now, and there's not a human outcry, we could be headed for 100 years. We could be headed for some long totalitarian, and that's really scary to think about, an authoritarian nation. And I don't know if we can stop it, but we sure better try, because they came for others and they didn't come for us. So are we going to be silent? We can't be silent. We don't have a program scheduled right now for the next Floridians for Democracy program. We want to encourage people to use this time to really reach out to their national and state legislators. The legislative session is in session. We've got a lot of bills that we're watching by contacting us through info@floridiansfordemocracy.org, info@floridiansfordemocracy.org. We can help you with that for our state issues. National issues, there's a number of different ways and programs that you can get on that, but just overwhelmed. That's what's happening right now across the nation. That's sort of what Eric was referring to with Bernie Sanders, but it needs to happen everywhere. They need to hear from us constantly. So we encourage you to not just sit back and wait for the next educational program, because we're getting an education every day right in front of us with these really major attacks. Lastly, I wanted to mention that although the chances are very slim, not trying is worse. We have 2 U.S. House seats that are up for vote on April the 1st, April Fool's Day. And maybe we can fool the other folks by sliding 1 or 2 of these candidates in, and there's one in New York. So there's 3 special elections occurring that could actually change the makeup of the United States House of Representatives, which could really slow this train down if we're able to pull that off. So not everybody on this call lives in Districts 1 or Congressional District 1 or Congressional District 6. But if you live in or have friends or people that you know that live, District 1 is in the Pensacola, Fort Walton Beach area. District 6 is in the Daytona, St. Augustine area, all the way over to Ocala, going west. If you know people, you have friends, or you just want to write to people to get out and vote, Monday's the last day they can sign up to vote for the April 1st election, but it's all over on April 1st. And long shots, but it's a low turnout time for special elections. And who knows, all these terrible things that are happening right before us, and the stock market crashing and all these things, there may be enough people to make that happen. So that's what we wanted to close out with, is there's opportunities for you to keep going. And we'll stay on the phone if any of our special guests need to leave. We respect that. And we just want to thank Tessa, Renata, Dwight, Eric. Thank you so very much for providing this great opportunity for us, as we are no longer the canary in the democracy coal mine. We are the canary on life support. And we need to have people know that and understand it. So let's keep fighting. Let's not be silent. Thanks, everyone. Stay on if you'd like to chat. We're going to go off of the focus mode and just open up and if you have questions, you'll be able to raise your Zoom hand, and you'll go right to the front. So let me get us off of focus mode here and stop focus mode. And now everybody's picture should start to populate. And if you have a question, Stephen, you're first up. Go for it.
Take your, off, you're on mute, Stephen.
Is that
There you go.
better? Can you hear? So I was interested in the distinction between accomplices and allies. It was talked about a lot, and apparently there are questions about it too in the chat. So could somebody go into more detail about the differences between allies and accomplices and co-conspirators, please?
That's you, Dwight.
It is, and I do have to jump right after this. So I was just kind of anecdotally making the comment that the view of an ally, we hear about allyship all the time, and a lot of it kind of gets contextualized in performative allyship. You know, you put up the flag for a safe space, or you put up the post on social media. That's a lot of the kind of 21st century allyship that we become accustomed to. But in terms of being an accomplice, I use the example of Viola Luiso. If you're not familiar with her story, she was someone who was impacted by watching Bloody Sunday happen in Selma, Alabama, as she sat comfortably in her home and decided to then travel to Selma, Alabama, to pack lunches, to provide transport, to provide first aid to individuals who participated in the march from Selma to Montgomery. So I think there is a clear example of allyship versus being an accomplice. Allyship was, she was sitting at home feeling very moved by what she saw on that Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I'm sure she could have easily written a letter to her congressperson, checked the box and said, I did my part. That's allyship. The accomplice is the person who says, I'm so moved by this that I'm actually going to physically go to Selma to play a part in making this a thing. Now, full transparency, unfortunately, she was murdered shortly after that march. But I just want to give an indication of the willingness to sit in that discomfort, to do what needs to be done in a very centralized way. For those who participated in BLM protest in 2020, to participate in one was great. To be arrested on the front lines because you needed real change at your local law enforcement agency is a different step. And so I'm not trying to define what that means for every individual, but I am emphasizing that we just can't be comfortable or complacent in our air conditioning, in our homes, and be satisfied with just kind of our social media allyship. We really do have to do whatever it takes if we're going to try and win this thing back.
Thanks, Dwight. Stephen, do you have a follow-up with that? And then we'll go to Dale.
Yes, I do. I don't think it'll take very long, but I understand that it's good to move people who are allies into people who are more active, but it seems like there's still a lot of people out there who won't even phone bank to CD1 or CD6 or do something that doesn't require a whole lot of initiative. How do we get them more involved, even though the consequences of the elections are becoming much more evident day by day?
Well, I would simply say each one teach one. One of the things that I find oftentimes that I hear, especially around the holidays, is people saying, well, I don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation with my cousin or my parent or my family member. It really begins there. It begins with intentionally having the uncomfortable conversation to get them to understand that this is no longer something we can kind of passively let happen. So I do apologize. They're announcing my train, so I do want to get back to Miami.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dale, thank you so much, Dwight.
I guess, Renata, you're it at the moment here on for us. Thank you very much for the presentation. I saw an Instagram a couple of days ago from a woman in Nebraska who's a part of she and her husband run a farm in Nebraska. And she said, you know, we're going to go bankrupt. She said 70% of agricultural workers, farm workers in those ranches are undocumented immigrants, and they aren't showing up to work, and they're staying away out of fear. And she says, we're going to go bankrupt. And she says, and we all voted for Trump. And she said, what were we thinking? One of the things that I wonder, is there any organized, I mean, I can imagine the 800,000 undocumented immigrants in Florida, if they stayed home. The community would understand our dependency in our hotels. And is there any way to organize that kind of thing, or is the fear just too much to be able to pull off some kind of a disruption like that?
So I think that there are both, and I see that Eric's still on the call, so he can absolutely chime in too. There are efforts to organize, and usually May 1st is a traditional day that the immigrant community organizes. I think, unfortunately, we're going to feel the impact of those policies at many, many layers and much quicker than people believe that we will. Not only because the removal of an incredible necessary task force, that a labor force that we have in the state is a possibility, right? We have 90% of people working in the roofing industry is foreign born in the state. Imagine this. We are still rebuilding from our last 3 hurricanes. Imagine what it is to rebuild homes in our state when 90% of the labor force could be impacted, directly impacted. We have hundreds of thousands of farm workers in the state who are foreign born, landscapers, our healthcare workers in the nursing and elderly care industry. A substantial number of this labor force is Haitian women with temporary protected status, that today they have the work authorization to man this labor force, but in a few months they will not have this capacity anymore. So I'm sure that this will impact us, and I'm sure that this will not impact us in isolation to tariffs, to firing of government employees that take care of our basic services. So all of this will create crises that we're going to feel. With that, we have the efforts to organize people to mobilize on May 1st. For immigrants themselves, this is a risk move. We have a policing apparatus, and people are afraid to go to streets. They are afraid to go to church. They are absolutely afraid to protest. The situation in Columbia University, removing a green card from somebody from protesting, that shows that not only the undocumented is vulnerable, those of us who have a authorized status, a regulated status, who are naturalized citizens are at risk as well. So this politics of fear make it very hard for immigrants who are vulnerable to bear the burden of public demonstration. So our hope is that we have not only allies, but we have accomplices when it comes May 1st, and that statement of impact is a statement of all of us, right? It's not only those who are being removed, it's not only the business that it's missing a labor force, but it's also us who know that if our neighbors are not here, our community is different. Our community becomes depleted. Our community becomes less strong. I know that Eric came on camera on, so I don't know if he wants to chime in.
Have something, Dan?
I was only going to say, my job used to be I was a labor organizer, and I have organized immigrant workers to go on strike. And, it is anytime people take that kind of serious action, even without the threats of the current administration, is a huge leap of faith, and there's a lot of fear to get over. So, that said, I think I also saw that video of the woman in Nebraska, and I think those voices in this moment in time can be impactful. And I've heard about other people in industries that rely on immigrants, beginning to speak up, trying to do things behind the scenes to try to slow some of the plans or advocate that the Trump administration slows its deportation plans. Um, and then, I think, even if it's not organized, I think that there's certainly just the climate of fear is gonna kind of create the effect in some cases of work stoppage, like it did for that woman in Nebraska. I was up in the Panhandle in Panama City couple summers ago, and I don't know if people remember a few years ago, hurricane, I think it was Matthew, hit Panama City, and it took that city a long time to recover. And their recovery was, that an immigrant community grew much bigger in Panama City as, they were rebuilding the city. And within weeks after the DeSantis administration signed, one of their most recent iterations of anti-immigrant laws. I think that was back in 2022 or 2023. When I was up there speaking to people in the community, they said the entire community, immigrant community, evaporated within a matter of weeks, right, out of fear. So it's who knows? Probably for me, the most notable labor campaign I worked on, I was at the University of Miami organizing janitors and groundskeepers about 20 years ago. We had a long strike there. And in the immediate aftermath of that strike, my former congressperson, where I grew up in Wisconsin, Jim Sensenbrenner, had introduced, at that time, some of the most extreme anti-immigrant legislation that had been ever introduced in Congress at that time. And of course, we saw massive marches of immigrant communities in the street that I think helped to, change the winds in that moment and stop that bill from passing. So, it's those kinds of things that have a big impact, and they're not easy to do because of all the reasons that Renato just said.
Yeah, well, thank you, Eric. You said something very powerful early in your comments that I can't get out of my head. We're creating an American apartheid. It's that just, I don't think I'll be able to get that out of my head unless we're able to push back on it. Thank you very much. Kat, you've had your hand up. The floor is yours. Put your mic on.
You're on
Yeah,
mute.
there we go.
Working on the unmuting part of it. Yeah, so there's a few things. Some of you who know me know that I have a history of, a long time ago, eons ago, when I was a kid doing farm work in California, side by side with the California's peonage program for people who would come in and do farm work and they called them braceros. I'm sure that, yeah, I see Renata nodding. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I got to see the way that they were treated versus I, who had white relatives in the town, was right there in my face every single day. The chilling effect of some of these things that are happening, I think, cannot be overstated. And that when I loved the conversation about moving from allyship to being an accomplice, and that means that you allow yourself to feel the discomfort, the pain, the agony of the people that people in this more privileged group are saying that they want to help, but that I think one of the things that we need to do is to find within our other communities, especially communities of compassion, communities of care, we need to make it certain that we set times up where people have conversations about the things they don't want to hear. And I am repeatedly in the position of, within a couple of communities to which I belong, of being the person who is trying to say the thing that others don't want to hear. And anybody that gives me support to make that happen, like Bill shares one of them with me, you could say, let's actually talk about this. What if we have some conversations about, not all among those conversations, what will this mean if you need somebody to do a job for you, but also what happens to children? What is the pain that these people are feeling? What is their terror? And also that we expand this, so when we're talking about immigrants and what is happening to them, at the same time, the same thing, possibly worse, is happening to people who are transgender. As I talk every day to people that are leaving the country or work for DOD and have to leave their jobs before they can't, before their passports are reissued in the wrong gender, and they will never pass as that wrong gender. So we have all these things happening at the same time. And I believe there was a statement made earlier about people were chosen so that there could be somebody to be better than. And that one of the most important things we do is humanize the people that, for anyone who grew up with whiteness, don't necessarily seem human. We've also been taught a lot frequently that in the United States, there's this caste system with Black people at the bottom and white people at the top, and then the rest of the people, the Latin people, the Native American people, people with disabilities, have to kind of fit themselves in between. This is not true. And for one thing, many of the immigrants do look Black. Many of them look brown. And you think about those people in, I know I'm just running on, but remember Charlottesville and people marching with tiki torches saying Jews will not replace us. They didn't mean that Jews were going to replace them with Jews. They were talking about Jews, this fake belief that they have that these elders of Zion want to import all these immigrants to replace white people. That somehow, if we become more in accord with the global majority, white people will be injured. We need to counter these narratives, and not all at once like I'm trying to do, but one at a time. That what you are saying is absolutely true, that we need to have the immigrants here to do these jobs. If we take away the young people that are our labor force, there is nobody to pick the fruit in an aging white America. When someone says, I was raised by a mother who was raised in Central and South America and the Caribbean. So my perspective, I think, is often at odds with that of others. But when someone says, I think maybe we should talk about whiteness here, to go ahead and have the uncomfortable conversation. Not only have it, but make spaces for those uncomfortable conversations to come up again and again and again. I could write a letter or make a phone call to my House representative who is handpicked to run for governor by Donald Trump. I'm not going to get anywhere doing that. If I write a letter to the editor of a newspaper that students who are attending Stetson University in Volusia County in District 6 are going to read, I might get somewhere. And if I talk to somebody who feels deeply that story and that pain, then maybe they will talk to somebody else. When we talk about relational organizing, we're talking about I speak to someone who cares about me, and then ask them to speak to somebody who cares about them, and tell them to ask that person to speak to someone who cares about them. I care about my nephew, who is darker than his Mexican mother. I can get maybe my brothers and my parents to care about him too. So that was a whole bunch of stuff, but what I really want to come back to is it's not enough to be an ally. And it's not all right to dismiss the work of those of us who have stood between the person of color and the white man with a gun again and again and again. We need to have those conversations, and we need to make it possible for those conversations to occur. And this is something that people who have positions of maybe any power at all can make happen. And I'm asking that each of you who has that platform use it to invite people into the conversation. And now, having spoken way longer than I should have, I'm going to shut up.
Pat, thank you. Thank you so much. You said important messages for us all. Seeing no other hands, Renata, on behalf of your team, if you would thank them profusely. This has been a powerful and vitally important program. And also, we are sensitive to the fact that you guys have just gone through 3 special sessions. The regular session is gone, and this attack is not going to disappear. And we've got to keep fighting and speaking up and speaking out. But thank you so very much. And with that, Bill, thanks for collecting the questions and pursuing this. And I know, obviously, Bill, you've got a great partner in Kat with your compassion efforts, and we'll hear about that more as the time goes on. Thanks, everyone. You have a great night, and be well and be safe.